On the morning of his 13th birthday, Josef K, a financial attorney in one of the city's most important banks, wakes up to the unpleasant surprise of finding two men, completely unknown to him, waiting for him in the room he rents. The two, who identify themselves as policemen, are named Wilhelm and Franz, respectively. They make it clear that they intend to arrest him, and also inform Josef that criminal proceedings are already underway against him. So, although he is in a state of arrest, the agents do not try to do anything against Josef, but let him go about his daily life undisturbed. He can also go to work at the bank as usual. Dazed by this sudden event, the protagonist tells himself that he is sure that the whole thing is just a huge misunderstanding. That same evening, he talks to his tenant, Mrs. Grubach. She tends to downplay the matter and even assures him that the arrest wasn't that serious. Looking for some company and moral support, he then visits his neighbor, Miss Brewster. At the end of the conversation, Josef suddenly gets carried away with his feelings and kisses her. When he receives a telephone call in which he is expressly summoned to appear before the court on the following Sunday, Josef K, still confident in his complete strangeness in the face of all the facts charged against him, goes to the first hearing of the case and follows the provided address, which leads him to a suburb on the outskirts of the city inhabited by poor families. The buildings all look the same, and he has a little trouble finding the seat of the court. When he finally manages to identify the building, he finds that the courtroom is located in a shabby attic. Here, he meets the investigating judge, who awaits him in a crowded courtroom. Josef, even though he still has not the slightest idea of what he is accused of, immediately plunges into a passionate and heated defense speech, in which he even attacks the poor functioning of the judicial bureaucracy. During the long self-defense, the usher's wife finds herself in a dark corner, engaged in a demanding sexual activity with a stranger, all in absolute general indifference. When the speech is over, Josef retreats from the classroom without anyone saying anything. The following week, Josef K decides to revisit the courts for another conversation, even though he has not been called back in. But when he arrives, he finds the courtroom bare, deserted, and dirty. When he comes across the bailiff's wife, Josef begins a conversation with her. He shows courage and self-confidence, and confides in her that he does not take the trial and the impending punishment seriously. The woman is very charming and tries to seduce him by showing him her legs and a hint of underwear. In return for her company, she offers to help him by giving him fresh information and news about her case at the trial, but a student who suddenly broke in ends up taking her away. Then, Kay meets the usher, who immediately complains about how everyone treats and takes advantage of his wife, and invites Kay to rebel in his place. He therefore leads him to the district office, located in the airless attic of the gray building. Here, the protagonist meets a defendant who pushes him away, believing that Josef wants nothing more than to take away his place in line, which is rightfully his. A girl finally helps him find the exit. Back at home, he converses with Miss Montag, another young tenant who shares a room with Miss Brewster, but he is interrupted by what he thinks is Miss Brewster and another tenant, Lance, causing him to lose the thread of the conversation. They almost seem to be in league with him. During a normal workday at the bank, Josef K hears a groan coming from one of the office's closets or storage rooms. He discovers that a thug is about to beat up the two officers who had informed him of his arrest. He learns that this is a court punishment for the petty crimes Josef has accused them of in his speech. Josef tries to dissuade the thug from his plan, but he does not succeed. The same scene is repeated the next evening, but this time, as he closes the door, he casually asks the servants to clean the warehouse stained with their blood. The young protagonist then receives a visit from his uncle, who has learned of the trial. He invites him to contact a well-known and esteemed lawyer for the poor named Huld. At the same time, he strongly advises him not to take the charges brought against him by the court lightly, as he seems to have done so far. Josef K follows his uncle's advice and meets in Huld's study a certain Lenny, his assistant and personal nurse, and he suspects, perhaps his mistress, who immediately takes a liking to him and advises him to be a little less uncompromising, while not hesitating for a moment to woo him. It ends with the two kissing. As they talk to the lawyer, it becomes increasingly clear how different this trial is from any other regular court case. The alleged guilt is left entirely to the bureaucracy that administers it, which is very extensive and multi-level, keeping the rules of the court secret beyond the identity of the judges. The lawyer affirms that the defense letters sent to him do not necessarily mean that they will actually be read by anyone at the courts. While they are still talking, the lawyer reveals that the head of the court chancellery is currently hiding in a corner of the large room they are in, eavesdropping. When he is summoned, he goes out to join the conversation. But at that very moment, Josef is dragged by Lenny into another room. Here, she also offers him her help. and the two then have a sexual relationship. Upon leaving the room, Josef finds his uncle visibly upset because the fact that he left just as the chancellor's boss entered the scene represents, in his opinion, a serious disrespect that could seriously damage his case. Josef K returns several times to see his lawyer, but the more he talks to him, the more things seem to be going in the wrong way. Huld, in fact, tells him how his situation is becoming more and more disastrous day by day, without ever providing him any real explanations. In the meantime, Josef's work at the bank is becoming more and more difficult, and is starting to lose quality as he is consumed by the worry of his case. One day, he receives a visit from an industrialist, one of the most important clients of the bank where he works. He has heard about his difficulties and offers to help him by sending him to a painter friend, a certain Titorelli. The latter will certainly be able to give him good advice, since he has a wide and deep knowledge of the court. As it turns out, Titorelli is the official court painter, the portrait painter of the members of the entire court, a title he inherited from his father, and therefore knows the process very well. Josef learns that, as far as the painter knows, the case of acquittal has never occurred in the kind of trial to which he is subjected. When Josef loudly declares that he is innocent, Titorelli replies that it is difficult to withdraw the accusations made against the accused when the court begins. No one is ever innocent. The painter then explains to the young man that his only options at the moment are to obtain a provisional verdict of innocence from a lower court, which can, however, be overturned at any time by the higher courts of the tribunal, which in this case would lead to the immediate resumption of the trial, or to try to thank the judges of the lower court in order to keep his case immovable. After explaining the whole situation so well, Titorelli finally lets him go out the back door. As soon as he passes the door, the young man finds himself in a labyrinth maze that he soon recognizes as that of the court offices, with an oppressive and suffocating appearance. Josef returns to Huld to officially renounce his help, having decided on the advice of the painter to regain full control of his practice. At the lawyer's office, he meets Block, a client of Huld's who strikes him as a subservient and downtrodden individual. Indeed, his case has been going on for 5 years, and he has gone from the successful businessman he was to a state of near bankruptcy. The man is thus practically dependent on Huld and Lenny, with whom he also seems to have a kind of sexual relationship. Josef coincidentally encounters him at the moment when he appears to be conversing with the girl, leading to a brief display of jealousy upon finding the man in casual attire. Block describes in detail his whole experience with the trials, saying that the accused tend to become superstitious and shut themselves off from the rest of the world. Kay then has the opportunity to be received by the lawyer, but the conversation between the two, during which the lawyer even makes fun of Block by calling him a little dog, is abruptly interrupted, and the chapter is therefore considered unfinished. The bank asks Josef to accompany a wealthy Italian client who has just arrived on business on a tour of the city, to show him the most important cultural sites, and in short, to act as a guide. However, the client does not seem to have much free time, and therefore asks Josef to accompany him only to the cathedral. They arrange to meet there for a certain hour, but when Josef arrives at the appointed time, the client is not there. To pass the time, Josef enters the large church, which at that moment is completely empty except for an old woman and a clergyman. He notices that the priest appears to be preparing to preach a sermon from one of the small side secondary pulpits on the side of the nave. Josef then begins to move away, fearing that the priest will begin to speak, and that he will therefore be forced to stay until the end of the celebration. However, instead of giving a sermon, at a certain point, the priest calls him by name in a loud voice from the pulpit. As he approaches him, the religious scolds him for some of his attitudes, especially regarding women. Josef asks him to go out, but at that moment, 2 men enter the church. The priest actually works for the court as a prison chaplain and tells Josef that he knows all about his trial. The chaplain's words, which he presents in a kind of parable about justice, a passage that the author actually wrote before writing the novel and which is entitled Before the Law, seems to have the purpose of preparing Josef K for the worst. The two then begin to discuss the proper interpretation of the parable, but the priest concludes that the story, which he also defines as quite old, has been considered in turn by many court officials in his critical analysis, each of whom has come to a different conclusion. Josef finally comes to visit on the eve of his 31st birthday. 2 gentlemen show up at the door of his room and take it without giving him any explanation. He himself offers little resistance to this, knowing that they are the enforcers of the sentence that the court has somehow finally come to. The 2 take him by the arm, and after crossing almost the entire city on foot, bring him to a quarry. They place Josef in a hole, whereupon one of them pulls out a double-edged butcher knife. As Josef K takes a last look at his life, he sees a man leaning out of the window. At this sight, a wave of rage seizes him, because he is seen while he is about to be executed. He is stabbed twice in the heart as he utters his last words, "Like a dog." The novel thus ends with the death of the protagonist. The execution of the culprit has been carried out.